A millionaire disguises himself as a construction worker and enters his own company. But no one knows who he is, and he is horrified when something happens. Robert Morgan looked at himself in the mirror, barely recognizing himself. His hands, used to signing million-dollar contracts, were now rough from cement dust. His designer suit had been replaced by worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. He sighed deeply, remembering the decision that had led to this moment. It's the only way, he told himself, adjusting the cap that hid his perfectly groomed hair. The problems in the construction of the new Morgan Enterprises headquarters could no longer be ignored. Worker complaints, inexplicable delays, and mysterious cost overruns threatened to sink the most ambitious project of his career. Robert knew he couldn't trust the reports that reached his desk. Someone was lying, and he was determined to uncover the truth. That's why he had made this radical decision: to infiltrate his own construction site as a simple worker. Robert Martinez, he murmured, practicing his new name. It was a common alias, perfect for blending in. With one last look in the mirror, he left his luxurious penthouse, leaving behind the life he knew. The bus ride to the construction site was a completely new experience for him. He observed his fellow passengers, tired workers heading to their jobs with resignation. How many of them worked for him without knowing it? How many stories and struggles was he unaware of? Upon arriving at the site, the chaos hit him like a wave. The deafening noise of the machines, the dust that rose with every step, the shouts of the supervisors. It was all very different from the neat presentations he received in his office. "Hey you! Are you the new guy?" barked a gruff voice. Robert turned to find himself face to face with Garcia, the site manager. He recognized him from the few meetings they had had, but the man showed no sign of recognition. "Yes, sir. Robert Martinez at your service," he responded, trying to sound as humble as possible. Garcia looked him up and down with disdain. "Well, grab a shovel and get to work. We don't have all day." Robert nodded and headed towards where he was directed. As he walked, he noticed the curious glances from the other workers. He wondered how long he could maintain his facade before someone discovered him. That's when he saw her for the first time. A young woman with a safety helmet and plans in hand was arguing heatedly with one of the supervisors. Her passion and determination were evident even from a distance. "Who is she?" Robert asked a nearby co-worker. "Oh, that's Lisa, the engineer. She has good ideas, but Garcia never listens to her. A shame, if you ask me." Robert watched as Lisa walked away, frustrated after the discussion. There was something about her that immediately caught his attention. Maybe it was her dedication, or perhaps the spark of intelligence in her eyes. Whatever it was, Robert knew at that moment that she would be key to understanding what was really happening on the site. As he began his first day of work, lifting heavy loads and mixing cement, Robert realized he was completely out of his element. His delicate hands soon filled with blisters, and his muscles, accustomed to the luxury gym, protested with every movement. However, as the hours passed, Robert began to notice things he would never have seen from his office. He saw how supervisors constantly pressured workers to hurry, regardless of the quality of work. He observed dubious materials being used in critical places. And above all, he noticed the atmosphere of discontent and resignation that permeated among the workers. At the end of his first day, exhausted and sore, Robert sat in a secluded corner to reflect. He had learned more in these few hours than in months of reports and meetings, but he also realized that this was just the beginning. The secrets of the site were deeper and darker than he had imagined. As he prepared to return to his luxurious apartment, careful not to be seen, Robert made a decision. He would not only uncover what was wrong with the site, but he would also do everything possible to improve it. And for that, he would need allies. With that thought in mind, he looked towards where Lisa was storing her tools. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would find a way to approach her. Because if anyone could help him unravel the mysteries of the site and improve the conditions of the workers, it was that engineer with the determined look and brilliant ideas. What Robert didn't know was that his decision to disguise himself and infiltrate the site would not only change the fate of his company, but also his own life in ways he could never have imagined. The second day on the site began with Robert's body protesting from the unusual effort. Muscles he didn't even know he had were aching, and his hands, now covered in blisters, burned with every movement. However, The determination in his eyes hadn't diminished. He was here for a reason, and he wasn't going to give up so easily. While mingling with the other workers during breakfast, Robert listened attentively to the conversations around him. Complaints about impossible schedules, poor quality materials, and abusive supervisors were the main topic. But there was something else, a murmur of distrust that seemed to extend beyond typical job frustrations. "I'm telling you, something doesn't add up," whispered a veteran worker to his companion. "I've been on many sites, but I've never seen so many accidents and inexplicable delays." Robert pricked up his ears, intrigued. Could it be that his suspicions about internal sabotage were true? It was at that moment when Lisa entered the break area, with a stack of blueprints under her arm and a look of frustration on her face. Robert saw his opportunity and approached, pretending to stumble and spill his coffee. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, while trying to help Lisa clean the stained blueprints. "Don't worry," she replied with a tired smile. Garcia would probably have ignored them anyway. Robert saw his chance. "Problems with the boss?" he asked casually. Lisa looked at him, evaluating him for a moment before responding. "Let's say he has a very traditional vision of how a construction site should be run. He's not very open to new ideas or improvements." "That sounds frustrating," Robert commented, genuinely interested. "What kind of improvements do you suggest?" Lisa's eyes lit up at the question. For the next few minutes, she explained to Robert some of her ideas to improve the efficiency and safety of the site. She spoke with passion and knowledge, and Robert found himself impressed by both her intelligence and her dedication. "Those are brilliant ideas," Robert said sincerely. "Why aren't they implementing them?" Lisa sighed. "Garcia says they're too expensive or complicated, but I suspect there's something more. Sometimes when I propose something that could save money in the long run, he seems nervous." Robert filed that information in his mind. Could Garcia be involved in something shady? Their conversation was interrupted by the shout of a supervisor, calling them back to work. As they parted, Robert felt a connection with Lisa that went beyond his undercover mission. There was something about her, a combination of intelligence and compassion, that intrigued him deeply. Throughout the day, Robert continued with his work, but now with a renewed purpose. He observed every detail, every interaction, looking for clues about what was really happening on the site. He noticed how Garcia seemed especially nervous when certain supply trucks arrived. He saw suspicious exchanges between some supervisors and workers who seemed to have a special status. And, most worryingly, he witnessed how flagrant safety violations were ignored in the name of efficiency. As he worked side by side with his colleagues, Robert also began to better understand their daily struggles. He heard stories of families who depended on these wages, of postponed dreams, and of constant worry about the future. At the end of the day, exhausted but determined, Robert realized that his mission had become much more personal. It was no longer just about protecting the interests of his company. Now he felt a responsibility towards these workers, towards Lisa, and towards the legacy he wanted to leave. As he prepared to leave, he saw Lisa one last time. She was arguing again with Garcia, her cheeks flushed with frustration. Robert felt an urge to intervene, to reveal his true identity, and put an end to all this, but he knew it wasn't time yet. He needed more information, more evidence. That night, back in his luxurious apartment, Robert looked in the mirror. The man looking back at him was different from the confident executive of just 2 days ago. He had dirt on his face, calluses forming on his hands, and a new perspective in his eyes. "What have I gotten myself into?" he asked aloud. But deep down, he knew there was no turning back. He had uncovered something important, and now he had the responsibility to see it through to the end. With that determination, Robert began to plan his strategy for the coming days. He needed to get closer to Lisa, gain the trust of the workers, and above all, uncover what Garcia was hiding. What he didn't know was that his actions had already caught someone else's attention. In the shadows, a figure watched with growing suspicion the new worker, who asked too many questions and seemed too interested in the affairs of the site. The cat and mouse game had begun, and Robert was walking a very fine line between discovery and danger. As the days passed, Robert became increasingly adapted to his new life as Robert Martinez. His hands, once soft, were now hardened by work, and his skin tanned by the relentless sun at the construction site. But beyond the physical changes, it was his perspective that was undergoing the most profound transformation. Every morning, upon arriving at the site, he instinctively looked for Lisa. Their conversations, although brief, had become the highlight of his days. Robert found himself longing for these moments, not only for the valuable information he obtained, but for the connection he felt with her. One afternoon, while working together in a secluded section of the site, Lisa confided her suspicions to him. "Robert," she said quietly, looking around to make sure no one was listening, "I think something really bad is happening here." Robert's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I've noticed discrepancies in the materials reports, quantities that don't add up, orders that disappear. And every time I try to investigate, I hit a wall of silence." Robert nodded, encouraging her to continue. This confirmed his own suspicions. "But that's not all," Lisa added, her voice trembling slightly. "A few days ago, I overheard a conversation between Garcia and someone on the phone. They were talking about diverting funds and maintaining the deception. Robert, I think they're stealing from the company." Robert's mind was spinning. If what Lisa was saying was true, the problem was much more serious than he had imagined. Not only were the interests of his company at stake, but also the safety of the workers and the integrity of the entire project. "Lisa, we have to do something," Robert said, momentarily forgetting his role as a simple worker. She looked at him, surprised by his vehemence. "But what can we do? We're just two people against an entire corrupt system." Robert was about to reveal his true identity at that moment, but something stopped him. What if Lisa was somehow involved? What if this was a test to see if they could trust him? "Maybe we can gather evidence," he suggested instead. "Document the discrepancies, record conversations if possible. If we have solid evidence, we could take it directly to the company owners." Lisa looked at him with a mixture of admiration and doubt. "It's risky, Robert. If we're caught—" "I know," he replied, instinctively taking her hand. "But don't you think it's worth trying?" The moment between them was charged with electricity. Robert felt the urge to move closer, to confess everything to her. But before he could do or say anything more, they were interrupted by a supervisor's shout. "Martinez, stop flirting and get back to work!" Lisa quickly withdrew her hand, a blush covering her cheeks. "We must be careful," she whispered before walking away. Robert watched her leave, his mind divided between concern over the corruption they had just uncovered and his growing feelings for Lisa. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, but he could no longer deny that his heart was as involved as his sense of duty. In the following days, Robert and Lisa began their undercover investigation. Carefully and discreetly, they documented irregularities, took photos of suspicious documents, and recorded conversations when possible. Each small discovery brought them closer to the truth, but also increased the danger of being discovered. One night, while reviewing some documents together in a secluded area of the site after working hours, they heard voices approaching. Quickly, they hid behind some large containers. "I'm telling you, that new guy Martinez is asking too many questions," said a voice Robert recognized as Garcia's. "I don't like how he looks at everything, as if he's searching for something." "Do you think he suspects anything?" asked another voice, which Robert identified as one of the supervisors. "I don't know, but we can't take any risks," Garcia replied. "We've come too far to let a simple construction worker ruin everything. We need to get rid of him." Robert felt Lisa tense beside him. His heart was beating so loud he feared they might hear it. "What about the engineer, Lisa?" the supervisor asked. "She's been poking her nose where she shouldn't, too." There was a moment of silence before Garcia responded. "Lisa could be useful. She has the workers' respect. If we can get her on our side, she could help us keep things under control. And if she refuses, then," Garcia said in a cold tone that sent a chill down Robert's spine, "we'll make sure her career ends right here." The voices faded away, leaving Robert and Lisa in tense silence. When they finally dared to come out of their hiding place, Lisa was pale. "Robert," she whispered, "this is bigger than we thought. They're willing to—" "I can't believe it." Robert took her hands, trying to calm her. "I know, but now we have concrete evidence. We can stop them." Lisa looked at him, her eyes full of fear and determination. "But how? Who can we turn to who isn't involved in this?" It was at that moment that Robert knew he couldn't keep hiding the truth. The risk was too great, and he needed Lisa to fully trust him. "Lisa," he said, taking a deep breath, "there's something I need to tell you. I'm not who you think I am." She looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "My name isn't Robert Martinez. I'm Robert Morgan, the owner of this company." Lisa stepped back, releasing his hands as if they burned. "What? No, it can't be. You've been lying this whole time?" "I'm sorry," Robert said, feeling his heart break at the look of betrayal on Lisa's face. "I infiltrated the site because I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't trust anyone. I needed to see for myself what was happening." Lisa looked at him in silence for what seemed like an eternity. Robert could see a mix of emotions cross her face: confusion, pain, anger, and finally understanding. "It all makes sense now," she finally said. "Your questions, your interest in the details. But Robert, why didn't you trust me sooner?" "I wanted to," he responded honestly. "Each day that passed, it became harder to keep the secret. But I was afraid that if someone found out who I really was, I would never get to the truth." Lisa nodded slowly, processing all the information. "And now what? What are we going to do?" Robert straightened up, feeling the weight of his responsibility. "Now, we're going to fix this. Together. We have the evidence and the power to stop this corruption once and for all." "Together?" Lisa asked, a small smile forming on her lips despite the gravity of the situation. "Together," Robert confirmed, extending his hand to her. "What do you say? Are you ready to change things?" Lisa looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before taking it firmly. "I'm ready." As they left their hiding place, ready to face whatever came, Robert realized that despite the dangers that awaited them, he had never felt more alive. With Lisa by his side and the truth on their side, he was ready to fight for his company, for his workers, and for the future he could now clearly imagine. What they didn't know was that their conversation hadn't gone unnoticed. In the shadows, a figure had been watching them, listening to every word. The game had just changed, and the consequences of this revelation were about to unleash a series of events that would shake the foundations of Morgan Enterprises and change the lives of everyone involved forever. The next morning dawned with a palpable tension in the air. Robert and Lisa arrived at the site separately, aware that every move could be under observation. The weight of their shared secret and the magnitude of what they were about to face weighed heavily on them. Robert, still dressed as a simple worker, noticed furtive glances and whispers as he passed. Did Garcia suspect something? Or was it just his paranoia playing tricks on him? Lisa, for her part, immersed herself in her work with fierce determination, reviewing plans and supervising tasks as if it were a normal day. But Robert could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. Mid-morning, Garcia called an emergency meeting with all supervisors and workers. Robert and Lisa exchanged worried glances as they headed to the designated area. Garcia, with his usual air of superiority, stood in front of everyone. "Colleagues," he began, his voice loaded with false camaraderie, "we've been informed that there's an imposter among us." Robert's heart stopped for a moment. Had they been discovered? How? "Someone," Garcia continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, "has been asking questions, snooping where they shouldn't. Someone who isn't who they claim to be." The tension was palpable. Robert could feel the stares of some workers on him. Was it so obvious? "But don't worry," Garcia said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll take care of this problem. Meanwhile, I want everyone to be alert. If you see anything suspicious, report it immediately." As the crowd dispersed, murmuring theories and speculations, Robert felt a hand on his arm. It was Lisa. "We have to act now," she whispered urgently. "We don't have much time," Robert nodded, aware that the clock was ticking against them. "Gather all the evidence we have. We'll meet at the main office in an hour." Lisa looked at him with concern. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to confront Garcia," Robert replied with determination. "It's time he knows who he's really dealing with." Before Lisa could protest, Robert walked away, heading towards Garcia's office. His heart was pounding, but his resolution was unshakable. It was time to end this charade. Without bothering to knock, Robert entered Garcia's office, closing the door behind him. Garcia looked at him surprised, then irritated. "Martinez, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Robert straightened up, dropping the facade of the humble worker. "My name isn't Martinez, Garcia. I think it's time we had a serious conversation." Garcia looked at him confused for a moment, then his eyes widened with recognition and horror. "No, it can't be. Morgan." "Indeed," Robert replied, his voice loaded with authority. "And I think you have a lot to explain." What followed was an intense confrontation. Garcia, caught off guard, alternated between vehement denials and desperate pleas. Robert, for his part, exposed every piece of evidence, every suspicion, pressing Garcia until finally the man crumbled. "You don't understand," Garcia said, his previous arrogance completely vanished. "It wasn't my idea. There are more powerful people involved, people who can destroy us all." "Who?" Robert demanded. But before Garcia could answer, the door burst open. Lisa entered, followed by a group of men that Robert recognized as members of the Morgan Enterprises Board of Directors. "Robert," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly, "we have a problem." One of the men, the company's vice president, stepped forward. "Mr. Morgan, you are hereby relieved of your duties with immediate effect. The board has voted for your dismissal due to financial irregularities." Robert looked at them in astonishment. "What? That's impossible. I'm the one who uncovered the irregularities. Garcia is responsible." The vice president smiled coldly. "On the contrary, Mr. Morgan, we have evidence that you have been diverting company funds for personal benefit. Your little game of disguising yourself as a worker only confirms your guilt." Robert looked around, seeking help, seeking understanding. His eyes met Lisa's, who seemed as surprised and horrified as he was. "This is a mistake," Robert insisted. "Lisa, tell them. Show them the evidence we collected." Lisa stepped forward, holding a folder. "I have the evidence here, but—" The vice president interrupted her. "Ms. Lisa, I assure you we will review all the evidence, but for now I suggest you stay out of this. We wouldn't want your brilliant career to be affected by unfortunate associations." Robert felt the world crumbling around him. How had this happened? Who was really behind all of this? As he was escorted out of the office, Robert looked at Lisa one last time. In her eyes he saw confusion, fear, but also determination. He knew that despite everything, she wouldn't give up, and neither would he. Because now, more than ever, Robert Morgan understood that the truth was more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined, and that the fight for his company, for justice, and for the future he had glimpsed with Lisa, was only just beginning. The days following Robert Morgan's dismissal were a whirlwind of confusion, speculation, and drastic changes at Morgan Enterprises. The news that the young and charismatic CEO had been removed from his position due to alleged financial irregularities spread like wildfire, generating headlines in newspapers and heated debates in business circles. Robert, now confined to his apartment and under constant surveillance, felt like a caged lion. Every attempt to communicate with his former employees or board members was blocked. His bank accounts were frozen, his phone tapped. It was as if overnight he had gone from being one of the most respected businessmen in the country to a pariah. But what hurt the most, what really kept him up at night, was not knowing anything about Lisa. Was she okay? Had they involved her in all of this? The last image he had of her, that look of determination amidst the chaos, was the only thing that gave him hope. Meanwhile, at the construction site, things had changed drastically. Garcia, far from being punished, had been promoted to project director. The workers, confused by the sudden changes and contradictory stories circulating, moved cautiously, fearful of saying or doing something wrong. Lisa, for her part, found herself in a precarious position. On one hand, she knew the truth about Robert and the real irregularities at the site. On the other, she was being closely watched by Garcia and the new executives. Every move, every conversation was scrutinized. One afternoon, while reviewing some plans in her office, Lisa received an unexpected visit. It was the vice president who had dismissed Robert. "Ms. Lisa," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I hope you're adapting well to the recent changes." Lisa nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. "I'm doing my job, sir, as always." Excellent, he replied, sitting down without being invited. You know, we've been very impressed with your work. We believe you have a great future in this company. Lisa looked at him cautiously. Thank you, sir. But if I may ask, to what do I owe this visit? The vice president leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You see, Lisa, we're in a delicate position. The situation with Mr. Morgan has left many nervous, especially our investors. Lisa maintained her composure, although inside her heart was racing. I understand, sir. How can I help? We need to ensure that everyone is aligned with the new direction of the company, the vice president continued. You have the trust of the workers. They'll listen to you. Lisa immediately understood what they were asking of her. They wanted her to be their spokesperson, to calm the waters and silence any doubts or rumors. Of course, she responded carefully. I've always put the company's interests first. The vice president smiled, satisfied. Excellent. I knew we could count on you. Oh, and one more thing, he added, rising to leave. If by chance Mr. Morgan tries to contact you, well, I'm sure you'll know to do the right thing and inform us immediately. With those words, he left the office, leaving Lisa with a knot in her stomach. It was clear they were watching her closely, waiting for her to make a mistake. That night, as she walked towards her apartment, Lisa noticed someone following her. With her heart racing, she took a detour down an alley, preparing to confront her pursuer. But when she turned around, she found herself face to face with a familiar face. Carlos, she whispered, recognizing one of the oldest workers on the site. Lisa, thank God I found you, the man said, looking nervously around. We need to talk, but not here. It's about Mr. Morgan. Lisa hesitated for a moment, aware of the risks, but her curiosity and loyalty to Robert won out. My apartment is nearby. Let's go. Once in the safety of her home, Carlos told her everything. He had overheard a conversation between Garcia and some board members. Robert had not only been falsely accused, but his life could be in danger. They're planning something big, Lisa, Carlos said, his voice trembling. Something that goes beyond stealing from the company. I think they want to use the new headquarters for illegal activities. Lisa felt the ground moving beneath her feet. Everything she had believed in, everything she had worked for was in danger. We have to help Robert, she said with determination. We need concrete evidence. Carlos nodded. I have an idea, but it's risky. There's a secret meeting tomorrow night at the site. If we could record it... Lisa didn't need him to finish the sentence. She knew what they had to do. The next day, with her heart in her throat, Lisa infiltrated the construction site after working hours. Carlos guided her to a point near Garcia's office, where they hid behind some containers. They didn't have to wait long. Soon, familiar voices filled the night air. Garcia, the vice president, and other board members were openly discussing their plans. Once the headquarters is finished, we can use the basements for our special operations, Garcia said. No one will suspect a construction company moving large quantities of materials. And Morgan, someone asked. We'll take care of him soon, the vice president responded coldly. A tragic accident, perhaps. The poor man was so affected by his fall from grace. Lisa had to stifle a cry of horror. They were planning to murder Robert. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, they heard a noise nearby. Someone had discovered them. Run, Carlos whispered, pushing Lisa. But it was too late. Security guards surrounded them in seconds. Garcia emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of fury and triumph. Well, well. Looks like we have some unwanted guests at our little meeting. Lisa looked around, desperately seeking an exit, but they were trapped. At that moment, as they were dragged towards the office, Lisa knew everything had changed. It was no longer just a fight for the truth or to save the company. Now it was a fight for their lives. And somewhere in the city, oblivious to all this, Robert Morgan was still looking for a way to clear his name, unaware that the danger was much greater than he had ever imagined. Dawn found Robert Morgan pacing restlessly in his apartment. Days of forced isolation had dented his spirit, but not his determination. Every minute that passed was a minute lost in his fight to reclaim his company and unmask the true culprits. It was then that his phone rang, an unknown number. Cautiously, Robert answered. Mr. Morgan, said a familiar voice on the other end of the line. "It's Jason, the security guard from the main entrance of the site. We need to talk urgently." Robert felt a mix of hope and apprehension. "Jason? How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter now, sir," Jason replied, his voice loaded with urgency. "Ms. Lisa and Carlos are in danger. They caught them last night at the site and—" Robert didn't need to hear more. In a matter of minutes, he was dressed and ready to leave. But where to go? Who to turn to when everyone seemed to be against him? It was then that he remembered someone, Sarah Rodriguez, an old family friend and respected judge. If anyone could help him legally and had the necessary contacts, it was her. Without wasting time, Robert headed to Sarah's house. At first, the judge was skeptical of his story, but as Robert revealed details and connections, her expression changed from disbelief to concern. "Robert," Sarah finally said, "what you're telling me is very serious. We're not just talking about corporate fraud, but possible drug trafficking and now kidnapping. We need to act with caution." "We don't have time for caution, Sarah," Robert insisted. "Lisa and Carlos are in danger right now." Sarah nodded, understanding the urgency. "I have some trustworthy contacts in the police. Let me make some calls." While Sarah worked on her phone, Robert couldn't stop thinking about Lisa. Was she okay? What had they done to her? Guilt was eating him up inside. If anything happened to her— "Robert," Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I have good news and bad news. The good news is that we've managed to locate Lisa and Carlos. They're being held in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The bad news is that we can't make an official move without more evidence. If we alert the wrong authorities, they could move Lisa and Carlos or worse." Robert ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "So what do we do?" Sarah looked at him with a mix of determination and concern. "We're going to do something risky, Robert. We're going to rescue them ourselves." The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparations. Sarah contacted a trusted ex-cop, now a private investigator, named Mike. Between the three of them, they elaborated a bold but dangerous plan. That night, under the cover of darkness, Robert, Sarah, and Mike stealthily approached the warehouse. Mike, with his experience, managed to bypass the security and enter the building. Robert's heart was pounding as they slipped through dark and damp corridors. Every shadow seemed like a guard, every sound a threat. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they found the room where Lisa and Carlos were being held. Seeing them there, tied up and gagged, made Robert's blood boil with rage. "Lisa," he whispered, running towards her while Mike took care of Carlos. Lisa's eyes filled with tears when she saw him. Once free, she threw herself into his arms. "Robert, I'm so sorry. We tried to get evidence and—" "Shh," he calmed her. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." But their relief was short-lived. As they were about to leave, they heard voices approaching. "Quick," Mike urged. "This way." The group hurried down a side corridor, desperately searching for an exit. They could hear their pursuers getting closer and closer. It was then that Lisa noticed something. "Wait, that door. It leads to the server room. If we can get in, maybe we can find the evidence we need." Robert hesitated for a second. It was risky, but it could be their only chance to expose the whole truth. "Let's do it," he decided. While Mike and Sarah stood guard, Robert and Lisa rushed to access the servers. With their combined knowledge, they managed to download a massive amount of incriminating data onto a portable drive. "We've got it," Lisa said triumphantly. But their victory was short-lived. At that moment, the door burst open. Garcia, flanked by armed guards, entered the room. "Well, well," he said with a cruel smile. "The couple of the year reunited again. How touching." Robert stood protectively in front of Lisa. "It's over, Garcia. We have all the evidence. It's time for you to pay for your crimes." Garcia let out a laugh. "You think it's that simple, Morgan? This goes beyond you, me, even the company. There are forces at play that you can't even imagine." Just when it seemed all was lost, a commotion was heard. Police sirens filled the air. "Looks like the cavalry has arrived," Sarah said, entering the room with a triumphant smile. Garcia and his men, caught by surprise, had no choice but to surrender. As the police invaded the place, Robert hugged Lisa tightly. "It's over," he whispered. "It's finally over." But Lisa, though relieved, knew this was just the beginning. "Robert," she said, looking into his eyes, What we discovered, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's much more at stake here. Robert nodded, understanding the magnitude of what they were facing. The battle to reclaim his company and expose the truth was just beginning. But now, with Lisa by his side and trusted allies, he felt prepared to face any challenge. As they left the warehouse under the flashing lights of police cars, Robert knew his life would never be the same, but for the first time in weeks, he felt hope. Together, they could do the right thing and perhaps just maybe build a better future for everyone. The days following the rescue were a whirlwind of statements, meetings with lawyers, and long nights analyzing the information obtained from the servers. Robert, Lisa, Sarah, and a trusted team worked tirelessly to unravel the complex web of corruption that extended far beyond Morgan Enterprises. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in Sarah's office, Robert noticed that Lisa was unusually quiet. "Are you okay?" he asked, approaching her. Lisa looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "Robert, I think you should see this," she said, handing him a folder. As he opened it, Robert felt the ground move beneath his feet. They were documents signed by his father, the founder of Morgan Enterprises, directly implicating him in shady deals with corrupt politicians and businessmen of dubious reputation. "It can't be," Robert muttered, slumping into a chair. "My father, he was always my hero. He built this company from scratch." Lisa put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Robert. I know how difficult this must be for you." Sarah, who had been observing the scene, intervened. "Robert, this changes things. If we make these documents public, we'll not only expose Garcia and the current executives, but we'll also tarnish your father's legacy and possibly the company's future." Robert remained silent for a long moment, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and thoughts. Finally, he looked up, his face a mask of determination. "The truth," he said firmly, "must always come to light, regardless of the consequences. We can't build a better future on lies and deception." Lisa looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure? This could cost everything you fought for." Robert nodded. "I'm sure. It's the right thing to do." The following days were a frenzy of activity. With Sarah's help and her contacts, Robert and Lisa prepared a complete dossier with all the evidence. They decided to present it simultaneously to the authorities and the media, ensuring that the truth could not be silenced. On the morning of the revelation, Robert found himself in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. He looked pale and tired, but in his eyes shone an unshakable determination. Lisa entered the room, approaching him. "Ready?" she asked softly. Robert nodded. "As ready as one can be to destroy your family's legacy, and possibly your own career." Lisa took his hand. "You're doing the right thing, Robert, and you're not alone in this." Together, they headed to the press conference they had called. The room was full of journalists, cameras, and a palpable tension in the air. Robert took the podium with Lisa by his side and began to speak. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice firm despite his nerves. "I've called you here today to reveal a truth that has remained hidden for too long. That truth that involves Morgan Enterprises, its founder, my father, and a network of corruption that extends to the highest levels of our society." As Robert detailed the investigation, showing evidence and documents, the room filled with murmurs and exclamations of astonishment. Journalists typed frantically on their devices, while cameras captured every expression, every gesture. "I know these revelations are difficult to assimilate," Robert continued. "Believe me, it has been devastating for me to discover the truth about my father's legacy. But I'm here today because I firmly believe that honesty and integrity must be the foundation of any company, of any society." As Robert spoke, Lisa noticed movement at the back of the room. Police officers were discreetly entering, heading towards where some of Morgan Enterprises' executives were seated. Robert, unaware of this, continued, "From today on, I commit to rebuilding Morgan Enterprises from the ground up, with new values, new direction, and total transparency. I accept any legal consequences these revelations may bring, and I put myself at the disposal of the authorities to collaborate in any investigation." Just as he finished speaking, a commotion was heard. The police officers were handcuffing several executives, including the vice president who had orchestrated Robert's dismissal. Chaos broke out in the room. Journalists shouted questions, camera flashes illuminated the scene, and in the midst of it all, Robert and Lisa remained at the podium, united, facing the storm together. Hours later, exhausted but relieved, Robert and Lisa found themselves in Sarah's office. News kept coming in. Arrests of corrupt politicians, businessmen under investigation, the stock market reacting to the revelations. "You've opened Pandora's box, Robert," Sarah said, watching the news on television. "This is going to change many things." Robert nodded, his face a mixture of weariness and determination. "I know, and I'm prepared for whatever comes." Lisa, who had been silent, finally spoke. "What will happen now with the company? With the workers?" Robert turned to her, taking her hands. "That's our next battle. I'm not going to abandon our people. We'll find a way to save what we can, to rebuild on solid foundations." At that moment, Sarah's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she turned to them with a serious expression. "That was my contact at the district attorney's office," she said. "They want to talk to you, both of you." Robert and Lisa exchanged a look. They knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult road, but they were in this together, and that gave them strength. "Let's go," Robert said, standing up and extending his hand to Lisa. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." As they left the office, towards an uncertain but possibility-filled future, Robert realized that despite everything he had lost, he had gained something invaluable: the truth, his integrity, and the love of a woman who had stood by his side in the darkest moments. The fight to redeem Morgan Enterprises' name and to build a better future was just beginning. But now, with the truth on their side and Lisa beside him, Robert felt prepared to face any challenge that fate might throw their way. The months following the revelations were a whirlwind of events. Robert and Lisa found themselves immersed in endless interrogations, judicial statements, and meetings with lawyers. The investigation spread like a spider's web, implicating high-ranking politicians, influential businessmen, and even corrupt judges. Morgan Enterprises, once a respected giant in the construction world, was teetering on the brink of collapse. Stocks plummeted, investors fled en masse, and contracts were cancelled one after another. The media, which had initially praised Robert's bravery, now questioned every decision, every move. One particularly difficult afternoon, after another tense meeting with the board of directors, or what was left of it, Robert found himself in his office, looking out the window at the city he had once planned to transform. Lisa entered quietly, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "How are you?" she asked softly. Robert turned, a tired smile on his face. "Honestly, exhausted. Sometimes I wonder if we did the right thing." Lisa approached, taking his hand. "We did, Robert. Look." She took out her tablet and showed him a video. It was of one of the workers from the site, Carlos, speaking in an interview. "Mr. Morgan could have kept quiet, kept his millions and his comfortable life," Carlos was saying in the video. "But he chose the truth. He chose to fight for us, the workers. That's something we'll never forget." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you," he murmured, squeezing Lisa's hand. "I needed that." It was at that moment that Sarah burst into the office, agitated but with a spark of excitement in her eyes. "Robert, Lisa, you need to see this," she said, turning on the office television. On the screen, a well-known senator was giving a press conference. To everyone's surprise, he was admitting his involvement in the corruption network and announcing his resignation. "Mr. Morgan's brave actions have made me reflect on my own role in this corrupt system," the senator was saying. "It's time for all of us to take responsibility for our actions." Robert, Lisa, and Sarah looked at each other astonished. It was the first domino to fall, and they knew many more would follow. "This changes everything," Sarah said. "Public opinion is swinging in your favor again." Lisa nodded, her mind working at full speed. "It's our opportunity to change the narrative, to show that Morgan Enterprises can be an example of transformation and redemption." Robert stood up, a new energy coursing through his body. "You're right. It's time to go on the offensive." The following days were a frenzy of activity. Robert, with Lisa by his side as the new chief operating officer, launched a bold campaign. They announced a complete restructuring of Morgan Enterprises, with an emphasis on transparency, business ethics, and worker welfare. They implemented a revolutionary corporate governance system, where employees had a voice and vote in important decisions. They created a compensation fund for those who had been harmed by past corrupt practices. And in a move that surprised many, Robert announced that he would donate most of his personal fortune to fund social housing projects and community development. The response was overwhelming. Employees who had been on the verge of resigning renewed their commitment to the company. Ethical investors, attracted by the new approach, began to show interest. Little by little, contract by contract, Morgan Enterprises began to recover. Not everything was easy, of course. There were days when the obstacles seemed insurmountable. Competitors tried to take advantage of their vulnerability, and some former allies treated them like pariahs. But Robert and Lisa stood firm, supporting each other in difficult times. One night, months after the initial storm, Robert and Lisa found themselves on the rooftop of the Morgan Enterprises building, looking at the city lights. "You know," Robert said, putting his arm around Lisa, "when all this started, I thought I was fighting to save my father's company. But now I realize we're building something completely new. Something better." Lisa smiled, resting her head on Robert's shoulder. "And we're doing it together. Who would have thought that a millionaire disguised as a construction worker and a stubborn engineer would make such a good team?" Robert laughed, gently kissing Lisa's forehead. "The best team, at work and in life." As they contemplated the city, they both knew that the road ahead would still be difficult. The struggle to maintain integrity in an often corrupt world would never end. But they were prepared to face any challenge together. Morgan Enterprises was becoming a symbol of change and hope, an example that even from the darkest mistakes of the past, a bright and just future could be built. And for Robert and Lisa, it was just the beginning of a new adventure, one in which success would be measured not only in profits, but in improved lives and strengthened communities. An adventure they would face hand in hand, building not just buildings, but a legacy of integrity and love. Dawn found Robert and Lisa at the construction site of a new social housing project, the first for Morgan Enterprises since its restructuring. The atmosphere was one of optimism and renewed energy. The workers, many of whom had been with the company through the crisis, worked with palpable enthusiasm. "It's incredible to see how everything has changed," Lisa commented, observing the activity around them. Robert nodded, a smile of satisfaction on his face. "And this is just the beginning. Imagine how much more we can do." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's rushed arrival. Her expression was grave. "Robert, Lisa, we have a problem," she said, showing them her tablet. "They just published this in all the media." On the screen, a striking headline proclaimed, "Scandal at Morgan Enterprises, Heroism or Conspiracy?" The article, signed by a respected investigative journalist, suggested that Robert's exposure of corruption had actually been an elaborate scheme to eliminate his rivals and take total control of the company. "This is ridiculous," Robert exclaimed, his face reddening with anger. "How can they even suggest such a thing?" Lisa, though equally outraged, kept her calm. "We must respond to this immediately. If we let this narrative settle—" "It's already circulating on all social networks," Sarah interrupted. "Competitors are taking advantage to sow doubts about our integrity." Robert ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Just when things were starting to improve, this new blow threatened to undo all their progress. "Who's behind this?" he asked, his mind working at full speed. "We don't know for certain," Sarah replied, "but I have my suspicions. There are several groups that would benefit from our fall." Lisa, who had been reading the article carefully, looked up. "There's something more here. It mentions internal sources and exclusive documents. Someone inside the company is leaking information." The realization hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. Despite all their efforts to create a culture of transparency and trust, there were still traitors in their midst. "We need a plan," he finally said, his voice laden with determination. "We can't let this bring us down. Not after all we've achieved." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Robert and Lisa worked tirelessly to counter the accusations. They organized interviews, published documents supporting their version of events, and met with employees to assure them that the company remained committed to its values. But the damage was already done. Some investors, scared by the controversy, began to withdraw. Projects that were about to be approved were put on hold. The shadow of doubt once again loomed over Morgan Enterprises. One night, after another exhausting day of crisis management, Robert and Lisa were in the office reviewing strategies. "This isn't working," Robert said, frustrated. "No matter how much evidence we present, the doubt persists." Lisa looked at him, a spark of inspiration in her eyes. "Maybe we're approaching this the wrong way. Instead of constantly defending ourselves, what if we completely change the game?" "What do you have in mind?" Robert asked, intrigued by the gleam in Lisa's eyes. "Total transparency," she responded enthusiastically. "Not just defending ourselves, but completely opening the doors of Morgan Enterprises to the public. Show every detail of our operations, our finances, our decision-making processes. Leave no doubt about our integrity." Robert remained thoughtful for a moment. "It's risky," he finally said. "We'd be completely exposing ourselves." "Exactly," Lisa nodded. "And that's precisely why it will work. No one who has something to hide would do something like this." After hours of discussion and planning, they decided to put Lisa's plan into action. The next day, Robert called a surprise press conference. In front of a room full of skeptical journalists and expectant cameras, Robert made the announcement. "Starting today, Morgan Enterprises becomes the first construction company in the world to adopt a policy of total and real-time transparency. Every board meeting will be broadcast live. Every financial decision, every contract, every bidding process will be available for public scrutiny. We'll even install cameras on our sites so everyone can see how we work day to day." The announcement caused a commotion. Journalists bombarded Robert with questions, some incredulous, others excited by the boldness of the proposal. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "we invite an independent panel of business ethics experts, investigative journalists, and civil society representatives to freely audit all our operations. We have nothing to hide." The reaction was immediate and divided. While some praised the courage and commitment to transparency, others saw it as a desperate publicity stunt. The following days were a frenzy of activity. The IT team worked day and night to implement the systems necessary for this unprecedented transparency. Protocols were established to protect employee privacy and sensitive client information, while maintaining the commitment to total openness. As the initiative was put into motion, something unexpected began to happen. Morgan Enterprises employees, far from feeling uncomfortable with the constant scrutiny, seemed energized. The pride of knowing they were participating in something revolutionary drove them to give their best. Investors, initially cautious, began to show renewed interest. Morgan Enterprises' total transparency made it a unique and potentially lucrative investment in a business world increasingly demanding in terms of corporate responsibility. However, not everything was rosy. The constant exposure brought new challenges. Every small mistake or delay was amplified by the media. Competitors tried to exploit any perceived weakness. One afternoon, as Robert and Lisa were reviewing comments on the company's public forum, another transparency initiative, they noticed a disturbing pattern. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a series of comments. "These criticisms seem coordinated. They always attack the same points, use similar language." Robert frowned. "Do you think someone is orchestrating a campaign against us?" Before Lisa could respond, Sarah rushed into the office. "We have a problem," she announced. "I just received information that a group of investors is planning a hostile takeover bid. They want to take advantage of our current vulnerability to take control of the company." Robert and Lisa exchanged worried looks. Their bold move towards transparency, though successful in many aspects, had left them exposed to this type of attack. "Who are they?" Robert asked. Sarah hesitated for a moment. "It's a consortium led by your uncle, Anthony Morgan." The revelation fell like a bomb. Anthony, Robert's father's younger brother, had always coveted control of the family business. Now it seemed he was willing to take advantage of the moment of vulnerability to fulfill his ambition. "This explains the coordinated attacks," Lisa said. "They've been preparing the ground for this move." Robert stood up, a mixture of determination and pain on his face. "I'm not going to let them destroy everything we've fought for. Not after all we've sacrificed to do things the right way." "But how are we going to stop them?" Sarah asked. "They have resources, influence, and now, thanks to our transparency, they know every detail of our operations. Lisa took Robert's hand, her mind already working on possible solutions. Maybe, she said slowly, we can use that same transparency to our advantage. If they know our moves, let's make sure the whole world knows theirs. Robert nodded, understanding the direction of Lisa's thoughts. It's risky, but it could work. We're going to need help. As the trio began to plan their counter-offensive, Robert couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and apprehension. The fight for the soul of Morgan Enterprises was far from over, and this time it was personal. But with Lisa by his side and the power of truth as their most powerful weapon, he was ready to face any challenge that came their way. The battle for the future of Morgan Enterprises and for the kind of business world they wanted to live in was about to reach its climax. The dawn found Robert, Lisa, and their trusted team gathered in the main conference room of Morgan Enterprises. The atmosphere was tense, charged with determination and a touch of anxiety. On the screens covering the walls, graphs and data flowed constantly, showing in real time the state of the company and market reactions. "All right," said Robert, standing up. "Let's go over the plan one more time." Lisa nodded, projecting a complex diagram on the main screen. "Our strategy has 3 fronts," she began. "First, we're going to use our transparency policy to expose every move Anthony and his consortium make. Every offer, every maneuver will be broadcast live to our shareholders and the public." Sarah chimed in. "I've coordinated with our legal team. We're ready to file a series of strategic lawsuits that will delay any attempt at a hostile takeover. Second," Lisa continued, "we're going to launch a massive public relations campaign. We'll show the real impact of our social housing projects, the improvements in working conditions, everything we've achieved since the restructuring." Robert nodded. "And third, we're going to appeal directly to our employees and the community. If we can demonstrate that the majority is on our side, it will be much harder for Anthony to justify his takeover." The team spent the next few hours fine-tuning every detail of the plan. They knew they were facing a formidable opponent, backed by years of connections in the business and political world. When the market opened, the battle began in earnest. As expected, Anthony's consortium launched its takeover bid, accompanied by a sophisticated media campaign that painted Robert as an inexperienced leader who had brought the company to the brink of collapse. But Robert and his team were prepared. They immediately activated their counter-offensive. On Morgan Enterprises' transparency platform, they began to broadcast live every move of Anthony's consortium, accompanied by detailed analyses that exposed the potential negative consequences of the acquisition. Lisa led a series of interviews and press releases, highlighting the company's recent achievements and its unwavering commitment to ethics and social responsibility. Meanwhile, Robert embarked on a whirlwind tour of all Morgan Enterprises construction sites and offices. He spoke directly with employees, listened to their concerns, and reaffirmed his commitment to them. The battle extended for days, with each side launching new strategies and counterattacks. Morgan Enterprises' stock fluctuated wildly, reflecting market uncertainty. It was during a visit to one of the social housing projects when Robert had an epiphany. While talking to a family that had benefited from the program, he realized that the true strength of Morgan Enterprises was not in its financial assets or market power, but in the positive impact it had on people's lives. That night, Robert called an emergency press conference. With Lisa by his side, he addressed not just shareholders and media, but all those who had been affected by Morgan Enterprises' work. "Over the past few days," he began, "we've been immersed in a battle for control of this company. But today, I realized we were fighting for the wrong reasons. Morgan Enterprises doesn't belong to me or to my uncle, or even to the shareholders. It belongs to the communities we serve, to the workers who bring our projects to life, to the families who find homes in the buildings we construct." Robert paused, his voice laden with emotion. "That's why today I announced that I'm going to transfer 51% of Morgan Enterprises' shares to a trust controlled by our employees and representatives of the communities we work in." The room erupted in murmurs of astonishment. Lisa, though surprised by the announcement, smiled with pride. "This trust," Robert continued, "will ensure that Morgan Enterprises always prioritizes the well-being of its workers and positive impact on society above short-term profits. No hostile takeover, No change in leadership will be able to alter this commitment. The reactions were immediate and varied. Some shareholders expressed concern about the impact on the value of their investments. Others applauded the bold move as an example of ethical leadership. In the days that followed, the landscape began to clear. Morgan Enterprises' stock price, after an initial drop, began to stabilize and then rise, driven by renewed interest from ethical investors and social impact funds. Anthony's consortium, faced with increasingly negative public opinion and the impossibility of obtaining majority control, finally withdrew its takeover offer. A week after the announcement, Robert and Lisa found themselves on the rooftop of Morgan Enterprises' main building, watching the sunset over the city. "You know," Lisa said, resting her head on Robert's shoulder, "when we started all this, I never imagined we'd end up here." Robert smiled, embracing her. "Neither did I. But now I can't imagine a different ending. We've built something that's bigger than us, something that can really change things." "And what's next?" Lisa asked. Robert looked towards the horizon, where the cranes of their projects were silhouetted against the sunset sky. "Now," he said with a smile, "we build the future, together." As the sun set over the city, illuminating the buildings with a golden glow, Robert and Lisa remained silent, contemplating the future they had forged. A future based on integrity, transparency, and commitment to the common good. Morgan Enterprises had been transformed, not just in its structure and leadership, but in its very essence. And in the process, Robert and Lisa had discovered that true success is not measured in profits or power, but in the positive impact one can have on the world. The story of the millionaire disguised as a construction worker had come to an end, but the legacy he had created was just beginning. And with each building that rose towards the sky, with each family that found a home, with each worker who felt valued and respected, that legacy would grow, a testament to the transformative power of honesty, perseverance, and love.